Today's Friday. It's about 1:30. I got off work early today, and the plan is to head up north to go to Salt Point and do some mushroom hunting. Maybe after that I'll go to Mendocino. I brought some of my diving gear, so possibly I'll go spearfishing. It really depends a lot on the overall weather and what the ocean conditions are like. So I just pulled off the one. This is Sonoma Coast State Park. Some of the most beautiful coastline in California, I think. I made it to Salt Point, but it's about 20 minutes until sunset, and it's already getting pretty dark. So I'm gonna go try and find a place to park, because I'm gonna sleep in my car tonight, and then the plan is first thing tomorrow, get out into the forest and do some mushroom hunting. But I had a little look around and I already see a bunch of mushrooms, which is a good sign, and the forest here is super beautiful. Just a really nice forest, and it's been getting plenty of rain. You can see just the duff is totally wet. It's looking good. Oh, see? Little mushrooms right there. And right there. I found a turnout on the side of this one-lane dirt road. Doesn't look like it gets a whole lot of traffic, so the plan is to sleep in my car tonight. I would prefer to camp, but the campsites are closed, and it's fairly cold. And although I have a tent, I do not have a footprint for that tent, so I would be getting pretty wet if I did camp. Alright, so I really didn't give too much thought to what I was going to have for dinner, so baked beans is going to be the main course, and then we'll see. I have some sausages in here, maybe some chicken, we'll see. A little burner. And I got my hot beans, got a mug of lemonade, and I'm just cooking up some sausage here, and I'll maybe make a sandwich or just eat it straight. Real hobo food. So this is how I get the car set up for sleeping. Basically toss all my food and small stuff down between there, and then I just lay down the seat, and I have this sleeping pad, a foam pad with a thermarest, and then I open the back. Just move some stuff to the side, and then I've got that wool blanket, and underneath that it's a moving blanket. That's just to kind of make it more level, because the trunk is like 1.5 or 2 inches lower than that. It's still at an angle, but it's not as bad. And if I get too cold, I'll just use that wool blanket. And then I still got some space right here. And then all my dive gear, my backpack and stuff, I put it in the passenger seat, and just move it forward and move the back forward. And yeah, this works. I have another sleeping pad that's fancier, and it's like a 4-inch inflatable one, but I want to try this one because that inflatable one was kind of shifting on me last time. And yeah, it's kind of surprising. I'm 6'2", and it's not exactly comfortable, but I have plenty of room. I can stretch out all the way in the Civic, and my feet don't touch the edge of the trunk. It's about 8:30. I just got to the forest. There was a couple people pulling into the parking lot right after I got here, so I got my bag and just walking in. It's a really nice day. That's what it looks like. Douglas fir, tan oaks. This is Madrone. So I'm just going to kind of continue this way. There's like a little creek that way, and then on some of the ridges on the other side I think I'll find some mushrooms. And this plant here is a huckleberry. I've never seen fruit on a huckleberry in California, but they're pretty similar to blueberries, and in Washington and Pacific Northwest I have seen them with a lot of fruit, although when they're tall like this, like over 4 feet or something, it's because they're not getting direct sunlight. In direct sunlight they're much shorter shrub kind of thing, but it's always good to look around the base of these, because in these mixed tan oak huckleberry areas you'll tend to find Matsutaki and a few other good edible mushrooms. And this right here is tan oak. There's a lot of tan oak in the area, and that's a good sign. It's got these kind of quite broad leaves with these sort of serrations here, and the bottom is kind of fuzzy. Might not be able to tell right away, but when you rub it, it gets these kinds of fuzz balls. And a lot of mushrooms like amanitas and porcini, boletes have mycorrhizal relationships with them, which means that the mycorrhiza of the fungus interacts with the roots of certain types of trees, and so you'll always find them in close association. And the reason they call it tan oak is because the bark of the tan oak tree has a lot of tannins in it, which is what kind of makes it this dark brown red color. And actually tannins can be used to tan hides, so they're polyhydroxylated polyphenols, basically, which interact with the proteins in skin and kind of lock them together to make a tanned hide. So this is one of the earliest ways that hides would be vegetable tanned. So right here we've got some turkey tail, and over here some older turkey tail. When this mushroom's young, it's really beautiful because these bands are all different colors. They'll be like bluish, purple, reddish. Very cool. This is one of those mushrooms that it's not poisonous, but people eat it as a medicinal mushroom. They'll brew it into tea. Personally, I think if a mushroom's main designation is medicinal, that basically just means it tastes like shit, but it won't kill you. So I never collect it. Just look at it. So right here we have a candy cap, Lactarius Urbitus. There's a few different species that get called candy caps, but this one is probably the most commonly associated with that name. So Lactarius Urbitus, you can see, has this kind of liquid called latex that's coming out of here. And in Lactarius Urbitus, the candy cap, it's kind of skim milk colored, so not totally opaque, but also not totally clear, and it doesn't change with oxidation. So when it's exposed to air, it doesn't change. And then the cap is not viscid, it's inviscid. It's kind of smooth, but, well, it's got like little dimples on it actually. And you can see it's got white gills. And the stem breaks like chalk, so that's a defining feature in some Lactarius and also other mushrooms, mainly Russella. So you can see it's not changing. And then the smell, doesn't really have it has a distinctive smell, but it's really hard to describe. So when candy caps are dried, they have this kind of artificial maple syrup smell. It's really sweet, but before they're dried, they don't really smell that way at all. They kind of just smell, it's not exactly mushroomy. It's like a faint kind of chemical smell. It's really not that good, but when they dry, they get this, yeah, like Aunt Jemima syrup type smell, and people make sweets out of them and cook with them. Cool. Okay, so here we've got what I believe is the first Matsutaki of the day. Let's check it out. It's looking good. I'm going to grab it down from the base so I don't rip anything. Yeah, that's a nice Matsutaki. So this is one of the most prized mushrooms by mushroom hunters here, and especially in Asia. In Japan, this mushroom is beloved. You can't farm it because it's mycorrhizal. So I saw some at the Japanese market in the Bay Area going for $35 for a mushroom just a little bit bigger than this. Personally, I like them. They're nowhere near that good, in my opinion. But some of the identifying features, it's near tan oak. You can see by the tan oak duff. That's good. They're usually associated with tan oak. It's got sand on the base of the stem, which seems to be common, not universal. Almost every time I find Matsutaki, it's got this. The next one, I want to clean it up, but you'll hear when you cut the flesh, it kind of has it squeaks. You hear that? And the flesh is super firm, pretty much snow white, no staining, and you can smell where you cut it. This one doesn't actually have a super strong smell, but it smells kind of spicy. So the most common description you'll hear is spicy cinnamon or cinnamon red hots, and I get why people say that. I think maybe that's the most accurate thing that I could think of also, but it's very distinctive, kind of spicy smell, and once you smell it, you'll be able to recognize it pretty easily. So always clean them up before you throw them in the bag, because any dirt that you leave on the mushroom is just going to roll around and coat everything else in dirt. But listen to that squeak. Nice. This right here is a Rameria, also known as a coral mushroom. A really cool looking mushroom. Let's see. Look at that. So, most of the guidebooks label this as inedible or not recommended for eating, but the last time I was up here, I met a lot of people who told me that they eat them or have eaten them, and so that's the kind of thing that happens. Consensus changes. On the other hand, there's a lot of mushrooms that you can eat that really just don't taste good, so it's not really worth the time and effort. And like with all mushrooms, you should cook Rameria well before eating it. So I think I'll bring some of this home, give it a little taste, see if it's acrid. No, this one's too soft anyway. Yeah. This one's just a little too floppy. I think even if this was edible, I wouldn't want to eat it, so I'll just leave this one here. But maybe if I find another better looking one, I'll take it. Here's a really beautiful example of a Rameria. So fragile. Looks like yet another species of Lactarius. This one, though, is Lactarius Deliciosus. It's quite a bit larger than the other two, and it's also got this kind of green staining, which is interesting. You can see this white substance here is already mold, so this is not good for eating, but you can see it's got this green staining and that kind of orangish cap. It's definitely a Lactarius, but it's way past prime. So here's some Russella species. I believe these are Russella Bicolor. Identifying Russella as a genus is pretty easy, and I'll show you how to do that, but differentiating some of the species can be very difficult to almost impossible without a microscope, depending on what species. But the Russellas will have these white gills that turn a little bit yellower when they get older. Got a nice smooth stipe that breaks like chalk. The flesh is pretty fragile. You can break it just with your hands. You can see how those gills are. They're not attached right there. So the younger one, you can see they're a pretty looking mushroom. And then one of the good tests for determining species level of Russella, or just getting an idea if it's going to be edible or what, is you can chew on a piece. Spit it out. Yeah, these ones are acrid, which fits with Russella Bicolor. If you're not familiar with what acrid means, it's kind of bitter and spicy at the same time, and it leaves this kind of unpleasant, tingling, peppery sensation on your mouth. But pretty mushroom, and one that's pretty easy to identify. Not all the Russellas are acrid, by the way, just the inedible ones for the most part. But anyway, that stem, breaking like chalk, kind of whiter, yellowish gills. It's a good example of some Russellas. Here's a variety of Swillis I found. I believe this one is Swillis lakei. Generally, the Swillis are not particularly good edibles. Many of them are edible, but they either have viscid caps or really soft flesh that makes them not great for eating. But these ones smell okay, and they're reasonably firm, but I think I'm going to leave them anyway. This is a variety of Manzanita Arctostaphylos. It's a beautiful tree. It gets this really cool bark that peels off and leaves it kind of totally smooth and red. It's also got some little mushrooms growing on it. There's that huckleberry right next to it. And then over here we've got Madrone. Close relative, looks similar, but much broader leaves. These look like Hypholoma to me. Hypholoma fasciolare, also known as a sulfur tuft. They are not edible, but they're pretty common and pretty, and I've heard you can use them for dyeing, although I've never tried that with these particular mushrooms. Alright, I see a lot of tan oak up here, and it looks like it's not too dense, so I'd be able to walk a good ways into it, so I'm going to explore this area a little bit. One thing I'll say is that the most convenient trails are ones that other mushroom hunters or hikers have carved out for you, but unfortunately, because they're the most accessible, those are the ones that get picked over first, so oftentimes you have to go off the trail, and the less accessible an area is, the more likely you are to find mushrooms that no one else has got to yet. Another Russella. Not bicolor this time, but there's a few red-capped Russellas. And I don't know what this one is off the top of my head. Here's another Matsutaki. This one's more mature than the last one, but still nice. See, sand at the base. That's what it looks like when the gills are all the way extended. Where there's one, there's usually more. You just have to look carefully. They're really well hidden. But they're there. You can really hear that squeaka. Now these are some monsters. These are Cortinarius species, Cortinarius Ponderosas, even though the name suggests that they be found with ponderosa pines. They're usually actually with tan oak. And they are really huge. Look at that. So a lot of the Cortinarius have brown, rusty brown spores. There's a ton of different species in this genus. This species has a viscid cap, at least when it's wet. It is edible, although definitely not choice. And I probably wouldn't eat these because so many of them are just bug-eaten and kind of, you can see the maggots have started to get into it, and even if they hadn't, the texture's really not good because these are kind of old, but really cool mushroom anyway, and just absolutely huge clusters. So this is a cool find. So there's a riverbed down here. It's not really much of a river going right now, but my strategy right now is just to kind of go up and down these banks. Pretty close to the river is good mushroom hunting. It's a little too steep on that side, right here anyway, but just kind of up and down this area in this kind of tan oak spot is a good bet for finding mushrooms. These brightly colored mushrooms are a species of hygrocepi. Common name for hygrocepi are waxy caps, although usually the caps are actually quite viscid. These ones are hygrocepi acutoconica, I believe, and they do have a conical cap. They come in all different colors: yellow, red, green. Usually I find them in redwood forests, but really brightly colored and very slimy, so usually the hygrocepi are pretty easy to identify on a genus level. Not really worth collecting for anything, but very pretty mushroom. Good mushroom. Here we've got another species of Lactarius. I'm pretty sure this is Lactarius Xanthogalactis. Prefix xantho means yellow. There's a species of agaricus that's xanthodermis, which stains yellow. Yeah. This one's got those rings here, and if we cut it, we'll see it produces latex, which is opaque white at first, like milk, and then as it oxidizes, it turns yellow. You can see it's really turning yellow up here. It's got a brittle stem, just like Russellas do. This one's pretty old. And like all mushrooms, you can taste a little bit of it and spit it out. And this one has an acrid taste. It's not edible, but cool nonetheless. Found some massive honey mushrooms. These are Armoralia. A lot of the Armoralias are edible, although you really want to get them when they're young. The Armoralias tend to have white spores, and they like dead or dying wood. If you find them near a living tree, it's probably sick and on the way out, or if it's a dead tree, then they'll grow on that sometimes too. Another Cortinarius Smithii. These have some really beautiful gills, and they can be used as a dye mushroom for dyeing silk and wool. I'd probably take these, but there's not a whole lot of them, and they're fairly waterlogged, but really beautiful color. It's about 12:30. I've been mushroom hunting for a little over 3 hours. I'm a little disappointed that I haven't found more edible mushrooms, but that's the way it goes sometimes. Plan now, I think I'll go back to the car, maybe make some lunch, and then I'll go to the ocean, maybe do some tide pooling, see what the conditions are like. Maybe I'll go diving, but I'm not sure. It's kind of cold, so we'll see. This is Oxalis Pes Capri. Looks a lot like clover. It's also called sourgrass because it's edible, and the leaves and the flowers are sour because of the oxalic acid, hence oxalis. It's more of a novelty, I think, than really worth eating, to be honest. And you shouldn't eat too much of it because too much oxalic acid can give you kidney stones. But interesting plant. And this is Fort Ross, which was formerly occupied by Russian settlers. And the cove. One of them, I'm not sure if it's this one or the next one over, has a shipwreck in the middle, which would be cool to explore sometime. Found some nice abalone shells here. Abalone fishery used to be quite healthy and very popular for free divers and scuba divers, but in the last few years the population has declined a lot, so the abalone fishery's been closed for a couple years now and probably will be closed for at least another 3 or 4. Hopefully they return though. These anemones have stinging cells called nematocysts, which are like poison-filled harpoons that they use to catch fish. You can feel them actually injecting into your skin because they're sticky, but the nematocysts are not big enough to get past the epidermis, so it's not dangerous to humans. These are called Gooseneck Barnacles. They're a type of filter feeder, and when they're submerged in water, this mouth opens up and they have like a feather kind of mouth that spreads out and captures the food and then pulls it back in. And they're attached to the rock by a stalk, which can be quite large in bigger ones. And these are edible, and different species is actually a delicacy in Spain. But at least in California, it's illegal to harvest them. But in other states, like Washington, you are allowed to harvest them. And I have, and they're quite good. These are California mussels, Mitilas Californicus, I think. These can get quite large, quite a bit larger than the European mussels that usually are served in restaurants. And these were a large food source for some of the Native Americans that lived in coastal California and all along the west coast. And they're good eating. I like the big ones because they have more meat, and since they get wider as they age, one that's twice as long could have like 3 times as much meat. Although they can, because they're filter feeders, they can take up plankton which have toxins in them, which can cause amnesic shellfish poisoning and paralytic shellfish poisoning. So it's always good to call the California Biotoxin hotline before you harvest them. And there's also an annual mussel quarantine, but that's not until May. You can see they're attached to the rocks by these threads. These are called Bissell Threads, and they form the byssus, which is also called the beard. It's a bunch of proteins that harden into these filaments, and some varieties of mussels, actually in Europe, have very fine Bissell threads that can be woven into fabric, like a silk. And these mussel beds tend to be quite densely packed usually, and they support a whole bunch of life that lives just under the mussel bed. Like here you can see some gooseneck barnacles, and here's a chitin right next to it. All kinds of snails and other invertebrates love to live in here. So you don't need a special tool or anything to get the mussels off, just brute force. Whew. And you can see this one's alive. That's the actual body of the mussel, the orange bit in there, and that's the beard. And the limit for California mussels is 10 pounds per person per day. And here's a live abalone doing his abalone things. So there's some purple urchins and probably some limpets and other stuff that I could get down there if I really wanted to. But I got a good number of mussels. Not really my limit, but more than I would eat in one sitting probably. And so I think I'm gonna head out. It's just a little rough to really get down in there for tide pooling. And I could probably go diving if I really wanted to, but I think I'll save that for another day. It's always fun to look under rocks in the intertidal zone. Here's a little kelp crab. He's got himself wedged in there pretty good. This is some hemlock, which is a poisonous plant that sometimes is mistaken for wild carrots. Socrates drank a kind of tea made of hemlock to commit suicide. One of the ways you can identify hemlock as opposed to wild carrots is this red on the stem. Some people say like it's the blood of the victims it's killed. Lichen, and I gotta say, this is some quality lichen. I'm making some ramen for the Matsutaki. So I've got some water, kombu, and some crushed up dried shiitake mushrooms in there that I'm just bringing up to the boil. And then I got this ramen. Just gonna throw away the flavor packs. This one was not my favorite ramen. And then once that's done, I'm going to add some of this noodle base and probably some miso. And then of course I'm going to add the Matsutaki. I chopped them up moderately thick, and I'm just going to let them simmer in there. This is really a lot of Matsutaki for a single serving, but they don't dry very well, and yeah, I just want to use them before they go bad, so easier to do it all in one. Probably let these simmer for at least another 5 minutes or so. They're not going to get super soft because they're very firm mushroom, but at least 5 to 7 minutes I think is probably good. If I was a more committed YouTuber, I'd probably go out and get a bunch of garnishes and stuff to make this look all pretty, but I'm tired and hungry, so the best you're gonna get is some pickled ginger. Today I'm gonna cook the mussels I caught yesterday. I've just been storing them in a plastic bag in the fridge. If you want to store mussels, you should keep them in the fridge and don't submerge them in water, salt water or fresh water at any point. If you store them even in salt water, they'll go through the oxygen really fast and they'll suffocate. They'll survive a lot longer in air, which they do in the wild. I only got 10, but as you can see, these are really big mussels, so that's going to be more than enough. And to cook them, I'm just going to stick them in the oven at 400 degrees for around 15 minutes, give or take. If you read some recipes, the most common is that you put them in a pot with some like white wine and garlic and shallots and boil them. I really don't recommend doing that with wild mussels because there's so much stuff on them, and a lot of this will start falling off as soon as you cook it, and then it'll get carried into the mussels and make them really nasty and gritty. It's also more convenient because you don't have to wash them really, don't need to clean them. I don't even bother debearding them, pulling off this byssus, because once they're cooked, you can actually just rip it off a lot easier than when they're raw. So I just got done cooking them. Just open them up like that. You can just rip the beard off. I like to dip it in some vinegar. Good. You don't need to worry about mussels that are closed up, as long as they seemed alive when you got them, and they don't look or smell too weird when you open them up. This is really cool. This is a Pea Crab. It's a type of parasitic crab, although it's probably more commensal because it doesn't really hurt the mussel, but it actually lives inside the mussel while it's alive and eats some of the food that the mussel sucks in. Pretty cool.